Welcome to Evolutions of the Stress Continuum. Which model is right for me? This presentation is brought to you by Wilderness Chaplains, a nonprofit organization dedicated to bringing crisis intervention, training, and support to wilderness first responders and the communities they serve. This presentation was created in response to several questions that have come up over the years, asking which stress continuum model is the original, is the best, is right for our team or organization. To try and explore these questions, we're going to look at several variations of the Navy Marine Corps Operational Stress Continuum, one of the first sources of the Stress Continuum model. We will discuss an example of adaptations to the model, we will look at different representations of the stress continuum, and we'll consider the similarities, differences, and how to select the best model for you and your team. Here we have one of the early stress continuum models used by the Navy and Marine Corps. This model is very thorough, containing all different levels of information, and is a good consolidated total tool. We start with the left column in ready, where our goal is to stay mission ready, as you see in the blue. Then we see the presence of a stressor, and the indication is that that stressor can push us into reacting, injured, or ill phase. Each column and row contains information that helps us identify, plan the next steps, take the next steps, and who's responsible for those steps. Let's take a closer look. In the injured column, orange, we have some of the signs and symptoms that help us identify when we're in that area, such as social isolation, sleeplessness, and more severe and lasting effects. The blue bar below these signs and symptoms gives us the goal that we're trying to achieve when we identify someone or ourselves in this area. The goal here is to begin healing. Under the goal, we have the people and resources that can be used to achieve this goal. Talk to a chaplain, counselor, or medical provider. The overall goal in all of these is to eventually return to the green to stay mission ready. The very bottom gives us an idea of the overall responsibility for these areas. It is the unit leader's responsibility to maintain mission readiness in their people and individuals under their control. In the yellow and orange, it's the individual's responsibility as well as their shipmates, family, and friends to help them identify and respond to these situations. In the final area, the red, this is caregiver responsibility, meaning a kind of provider or mental health professional is needed to help return to mission readiness. This model is still used in many places, is a good tried and true example and foundation, and a model that can be built on and used in almost any situation for first responders and others. Here we have an example of how the original model has been taken and modified to make it larger reaching and perhaps a little more simplified. Notice some of the key differences. Under the ready column, we see terms like good to go, well-trained, cohesive units, and ready families. This seems to take the focus away from just the individual and looks at a larger context. This could be an individual who's good to go, it could be the unit or the team that's cohesive and good to go, or it could be the family, friends, or social circle. This allows for a broader conversation and consideration of where different elements of your life fit into this model. We still see the impact of stress, and we still see the levels of responsibility from unit leader to individual to caregiver. What this model is lacking is the goal of each area and the next steps to achieve that goal. While this may seem as lacking for this being a resource, it also opens the door to further conversation and could be provided in conjunction with additional resources, training materials, and ideas on how to move forward. So there's nothing wrong with the simplified model, as long as some of the needed information is provided separately or in an attachment. This next iteration of the stress continuum model shows a move from the more general and broader categories to a better focus on the individual, possibly for the purposes of discussion, self-awareness, and self-assessment. Let's take a look at some of the key differences. While we can see the colors and categories remain the same, we're provided with a better definition of each. For example, under the yellow, reacting, we now understand the reacting in yellow category as mild and transient distress or loss of functioning, always going away and at a lower risk for illness. This can help breed better understanding for the different areas. We also see examples of the causes. This can help answer questions and prepare people for what might cause them to end up in these different areas. We have in the yellow any stressor, and then all the way to the red, types of serious conditions such as PTSD, depression, anxiety, and substance dependence. The features, unlike the previous model, are not general or broadly oriented, but are more individually focused and be a good tool for self-evaluation or for a specific conversation. Looking at the yellow, we see someone may have a loss of motivation, difficulty sleeping, or not having fun. These not only give someone a good tool for self-awareness, but also good talking points to begin addressing with someone. It's easier to look at someone and say, hey, you seem to not be focused lately or not having as much fun. Is everything okay? I'm kind of worried you might be in the yellow. Whereas in the previous one, the focus was more on the big picture, cohesiveness, family, and group. This is way more individual focused. We do see, because this is a military model, the bottom still holds levels of responsibility. It's up to the unit leader to help people maintain readiness. It's up to the individual, peer, and family to notice and react to what's going on in the yellow and orange. And it falls on a caregiver, mental health provider, or other professional to address what's going on in the red. While we don't see necessarily the next steps to take, this can be used in conjunction with training on resources, discussions on what next steps to be, or how to access the resources needed at those levels of responsibility. Over time, the original stress continuum models have been adapted for use by other individuals, agencies, organizations, and teams. Here we have an example of one done by Laura McGladrey for first responders. She uses the same categories and colors, green ready, yellow reacting, orange injured, and red ill, but changes the contents of the boxes, customizing the signs, symptoms, things that may be experienced to be more available and make more sense to her responder audience. She also takes away the level of responsibility, possibly because different responder groups have different structures, hierarchies, and different categories of responsibility that may not be the same as for the military models. This is just one example of how the basic model has been customized and can be more accessible and available for groups such as first responders or other audiences that have unique understanding or needs that this model can still address with a few changes. In addition to changing the contents of the columns, sometimes we see changes to the actual shape or the way the model is presented. Here we have two examples of the curve being used to represent stress. On the left-hand side, we have the axes of performance and stress level, showing the relationship of what happens to performance as stress level increases. You can see that this goes through too little stress and optimum stress to too much stress and burnout. The signs and symptoms are more simplified, but follow the curve and explain different levels such as inactive, laid back, fatigue, exhaustion, all the way to anxiety, panic, anger, and breakdown. On the right side, we see another curve, but used in a slightly different way. Instead of the right to left progression, we have a center to exterior progression. This looks at the peak performance on top of your game optimal stress level in the green in the center, suggesting this is where you want for your better ability to function. On either side of this, we have the yellow, which is indicating maybe a caution zone, and the red, which is too little and too much stress respectively. You can see the details along this chart that give some indicators of what the signs, symptoms, and concerns are in these different areas. This suggests that there is a level of stress happening during operations, and that there are ways that too much stress or too little stress can be harmful to our ability to function. Both of these examples are legitimate tools that have been utilized well by the different individuals or departments that created them. It is perfectly fine to use something like a curve, as long as you understand what it represents and clarity and consistency in the message comes across. As the use of the stress continuum model becomes more mainstream and people become more familiar with it, it becomes used as a jumping point to make other tools and ideas for communicating about stress, mental wellness, etc. Here we have two examples of some adaptations that have been made. On the left side, we see the chart of increasing loss of mental control, moving from pressure and tension to the right towards strain, stress, and distress. It follows the same model progression from left to right of ideal to less than ideal, and contains similar signs, symptoms, and ideas as we've seen in our model. However, it's clearly being used for a different area of learning, a different tool, and a different way to identify what's going on. On the right side, we see a more specific focus on the injured category. The four areas are still the same: ready, reacting, injured, and ill, but instead of exploring each one individually, the focus goes into the injured category and looks at the four sources of stress injury. This allows for a context of what happens with stress injury before, after, with the ready, reacting, all the way to ill, but then also gives us a focus on the four causes, in this case, trauma, loss, inner conflict, and wear and tear. This can be an excellent tool for focusing in specifically on the injured category, rather than focusing on the big picture of the whole continuum. As you can see, the stress continuum can be used as a tool in itself, and also as a starting point for other ideas, conversations, and training ideas. How it works best for you or your agency or team is the best way to use it. Hopefully in looking at these models, you've noticed some of the commonalities and differences that can give us some good takeaways. We seem to have a similar pattern of progression from left to right, from green to red, spanning from ready to ill. Each category indicates some level of a physical or psychological symptom to help us identify what's going on. The differences among the models seem to be the causes, the resources available, or the responsibilities at each level. We reach the conclusion then that no one model is necessarily the right model. The best choice for you is the one that meets your needs. Here are some things to consider when reviewing models and deciding which one is best for you, your team, organization, or your purposes. First, is your model easy to understand? Notice that in all the models we reviewed, the colors stand out, the categories are very simple, and it follows a logical progression from left to right, from better to worse. Make sure that it's visually easy to see, to comprehend, and not too complicated, so people can look at it and understand it without having to ask too many questions every time they address it. Think about the purpose. Does the model normalize and help individuals understand reactions to stress? The intent behind these models is to breed conversation, awareness, and help identify where we are on the model and possibly what to do in the different stages. So does it answer that intent? Can it help normalize and help understanding? Finally, what will the model be used for? Is it being used as a tool to improve communication, to build connection and cohesion within teams, and to increase responder, individual, and team well-being? As long as you know what the intent of the tool is before you go into using it or developing your own, you'll be on the right track. So make sure you understand the three basic components: that it's clear and easy to understand, that it helps with understanding and normalization, and that it's a tool that can be used for a purpose such as communication, connection, or well-being. Keeping these areas in mind when you look at the different models or start to design your own will put you on the track to success. Thank you for attending this presentation. Consider visiting us at wildernesschaplains.org to learn more about our organization, and please consider making a donation to support this and future trainings like it.